Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. Company paid little money for the work, so the employee decided to move to another position, and now he receives much more. The second story. Postman didn't want to deliver mail due to company policy, so my grandfather came up with a plan. The third story. Manager doesn't want to let me out of the office for 2 hours. They lose 40 hours over the next week instead. And the first story is, your contact is almost up. You should maybe start looking for other positions. First, a little backstory. Doug works for one of the larger banks here in Canada. For someone without post-secondary, he's done incredibly well for himself. He's 28 now and has been working with this bank for about 9 years. He started as a teller and worked his way all the way up to just below a branch manager, but more customer service oriented. The story starts February 2020, right as COVID was starting to snowball here. Doug had worked in a few different branches over the years and is quite personable. When a former colleague told him about a position in the wealth department, he thought it might be good for change. It was also work from a small office downtown, which meant he didn't have to go into a branch every day and deal with customers and employees face to face. He decided to apply. With a good recommendation, he got an interview. How this position works is he essentially would be working directly for two big investment banker types, but there was an office manager, we'll call her Sarah, who he also reported to as well. This office manager trained him, provided support, etc. During the interview, he was told that the base salary for the new position was $10,000 per year less, but there was monthly bonuses paid out that would bring him well over the salary cap for his previous position. Once he accepted, it didn't really sit well with me since he didn't get that in writing. He got along wonderfully with his investment banker bosses. They loved having someone so personable, who also had connections in branch. The divisions were kept pretty church and state, retail and wealth, so it saved a lot of time having Doug around, since he could just message friends from retail to get information, without having to go through all the typical hoops. He also knew most of the systems already, and got all the courses he needed very quickly. Once COVID got bad, offices were shut down. Everyone had to work from home. Since Doug was new, he got kinda shafted. He was one of the last people to get a laptop. You can't use your own. Had one monitor. Regularly got stuck going into the office to mail things. Also, since he was new, he had a lot of questions and needed help regularly. With work from home, that meant Sarah had to put in a lot of effort to answer his questions. She was a miserable woman. She was condescending, took a lot of time to answer him, or would just say figure it out. It was incredibly frustrating for Doug, especially considering the bonus he was receiving was a fraction of what was promised. He was making considerably less money and was doing a lot more work. After about a year, February 2021 at this point, Doug was doing very well at his position. The investment bankers regularly praised him. They even got him fancy Christmas gifts. The only downside was Sarah. She still was giving Doug a very hard time and just generally was being rude and condescending. When Doug's 1 year rolled around, Sarah had a meeting with him about some issues a client was having. At the end of the meeting, she said, since your contract renewal is coming up, you might want to consider keeping your options open and looking for some other positions in other departments. We both knew this was an empty threat, since his actual bosses basically needed him at this point. One of them started having some pretty serious health issues, and Doug was a superstar helping him through it while maintaining his book of business. We knew this was just Sarah trying to make him feel small. Even still, Doug was pretty upset after hearing this. He had been putting in 12 hours a day for less money and was borderline being bullied by Sarah the entire time. So he decided to take her advice. He sent out one application to a different division of the bank, got a call back the same day. Turns out the lady who runs this division for our province used to work with Doug. She was his branch manager back when he was a teller. With this bank, in order to move to other departments, they touch base with your current boss. They spoke to both of his investment banker bosses, and they were taken by total surprise. They called Doug to see why he was quitting since he was doing so well. They had no idea Sarah had promised him more money in the interview, that he took a pay cut to be there. They had no idea Sarah had been treating him the way she had been, since they didn't interact with her often. A day or two later, he had a Zoom meeting with the investment banker bosses and Sarah. They tried to counteroffer him the same salary, $17,000 more per year, and Sarah changed her tune completely. Tried to backpedal on what she said about looking for other positions. Doug politely declined their offer and accepted the new position, partly because he felt taken advantage of, since they were so easily able to give him almost a $20,000 pay raise, but also because he didn't feel secure in the position due to Sarah's remarks. His investment banker bosses still call him regularly, 4 months later, to help with clients. Some of their clients only want to speak with Doug, or they need Doug's help with systems he designed to make their lives easier. Now Doug works from home still, makes $17K more than he did in the wealth department, and his investment banker bosses pay him a few hundred a week for his freelance work. Oh, and the best of it all is that Sarah took on all of Doug's duties for months, while they found his replacement. Doug's investment banker bosses told him their new assistant is someone who worked in the mailroom of the office. He took 3 attempts to pass his exams, and has no idea what he's doing. The second story is 6 feet out or 6 feet up. Backstory. Decades ago, my grandparents purchased a large plot of land out in the middle of nowhere, with the idea to build themselves a home and retire on that plot. They were both from the rural Midwest, so they originally wanted to keep horses, chickens, and maybe a few other small farm animals on this land, hence the size. As the years went by and they started actually making plans, they realized that horses weren't really feasible for a variety of reasons. By that time, the area around their plot of land had been significantly more developed, so they instead split the plot into 8 pieces and sold the other 7, essentially financing their original purchase and the construction of the house, leaving their retirement and pension untouched. Because of their incredibly advantageous position, they made a point to only sell to like-minded buyers, friendly retirees who were looking for their last home and wanted a bit of the same rural isolation that my grandparents wanted. The result is that my grandparents ended up with their dream bungalow on a spacious lot, surrounded by friendly neighbors, and without any major time or money obligations. The event. The area ended up becoming incorporated, and the town they were now living in eventually decided that the 2-lane blacktop road needed to be repaved and upgraded, with sidewalks, gutters, and all the other amenities townspeople expect. Now, the county that the town was incorporated from had planned ahead, and there was plenty of room set aside for exactly this type of project, so none of the residents needed to move their fences or give up property to the state. However, most of them had placed their mailboxes on a post about a half dozen feet from their property line, nearer to the road, so that the postman had easy access. When the construction started, a city representative visited each property on this street and gave them a heads up on what to expect, and also asked that the residents move their mailboxes to make room for construction. My grandfather, being of light schedule and helpful demeanor, offered to help his neighbors temporarily relocate their mailbox and post. He had retired from a career as a handyman, and several of his children owned landscaping or similar businesses. So he and my uncle spent a few hours with a mini backhoe and unearthed all 8 of his neighbors' mailbox posts, cement and all. He saved the posts to reinstall when the road was complete, and mounted the mailbox proper on each property's fence. The issue. Lo and behold, on Monday they had no mail service. After a bit of investigation, they realized none of their neighbors did either. So the next morning, my grandfather waited outside to see what the problem was. Right on time, the mailman drove down their side of the street, completely ignoring all 8 properties. Redoubling his efforts, the next morning my grandfather was able to flag the mailman down and ask what the problem was. According to my grandfather, the very curt response was, "I'm not required to deliver to any mailbox more than 36 inches from the edge of the road." A call to the postal service confirmed this rule. The mailmen may deliver outside that limit if they want, but they're not required to. The compliance. Now, it's pretty amazing what you can get done with 8 business hours of free time. The problem was that 36 inches from the current edge of the road is in the way of construction. My grandfather spoke to the construction supervisor, who was sympathetic, but just as stuck as my grandfather was. My grandfather then visited the postal office and returned with a current copy of the regulations about mailbox locations. After a few hours of study and another visit to the construction supervisor's office, with a half dozen donuts and some coffee, he had formulated a plan. Remember his sons who ran landscaping businesses? My grandfather got in his truck and visited both businesses. He returned home with 8 20-gallon plant pots. These things are huge, 30 inches tall and just about as large around. You see, while the construction guys couldn't mess with a federally protected fixed mailbox, they were happy to move a pot out of their way in the morning and back when the job was finished for the day. My grandma makes some pretty good donuts, which is a pretty easy task when you have earth-moving equipment nearby. So each post was replanted in a 20-gallon pot, and each mailbox was remounted on a post, and each pot was placed conservatively within 36 inches of the current road's edge. The kicker was that a mailbox post that's meant to stick 4 feet out of the ground has at least 2 feet buried in the ground. In other words, it's a 6-foot post. When you put that inside a pot with a few inches of soil underneath, and that pot on the surface of the ground, a mailbox on top is easily more than 6 feet in the air. You see, the mailbox codes clearly specify how far horizontally a mailbox needs to be from the road, but say nothing about how high the mailbox needs to be. It took a few more conversations with the postman and a visit from the local inspector, but the mailman spent the better part of 6 months delivering to 8 mailboxes 6 feet in the air, rather than walk the extra 6 feet to the fence. The last story is, employer doesn't want me to waste 2 hours. They waste 40 instead. A number of years ago, I worked for a small, fairly local outsourcing company. I was assigned to work with a particularly high-profile client of theirs. The client's office was just around the corner from my employer, but my employer insisted that I remain within their own offices to work, so the client provided me with a laptop to use that connected to their network remotely. It's important to note that whilst the client were decent, my employer had a totally fear-based management culture. The managers wanted eyes on the employees at all times because they assumed people would slack off given half the chance. After almost a year of working there, I got a call from the client notifying me that my client-given laptop needed some critical updates, and I would have to bring it in so IT could apply the updates locally. All sounded very reasonable to me. I brought this to the attention of my manager and advised I would be out of the office for a while so I could take my laptop to the client's site around the corner for critical updates. No bueno. My manager ignored everything about the critical updates part and focused instead on the out of our office for 2 hours part. They insisted that they knew I had a remote connection to the client's office, so any updates could be applied without me needing to leave and take my laptop anywhere. I got the impression they thought I was lying to get some free time off. I decided that this had the potential to teach my employer/the managers a great lesson about not trusting their own employees. So like the model employee I was, I shrugged, "You know best, boss," and complied with their request, continuing work as usual. Until the following morning, when I switched on my laptop and nothing would work. The machine refused to connect to the client's remote network. The various software applications I used for my job also wouldn't run due to the lack of connection. Error messages flashed up on every file I tried to access, warning that my credentials had been blocked. I was left holding a very expensive brick. My manager was livid when I explained I couldn't do any work. They clicked around on my laptop trying to fix it themselves, but there was no other solution to be had. They sent me around the corner to the client's office so I could hand in my laptop to IT. I took my time enjoying a coffee and breakfast in the client's on-site cafe whilst IT worked on my laptop. But when I went to check on it after an hour, I believe the client IT manager's words were, "It's effed." The critical update mentioned before was intended to repair something wrong with the way the remote connections worked. When my machine didn't get the update, it lost connection with the client's network and immediately locked me out of everything, effectively blacklisting my credentials. IT manager explained that they would have to build me an entirely new machine and set up new accounts, a process that would take about a week to ensure everything filtered through correctly and could be tested. The client was fine and understanding about it, but when I returned empty-handed to my employer's office, my manager got extremely snotty with me and insisted I still had to work somehow. I pointed out that I had no client laptop to work on, so instead of sending me home, they forced another employee to share her computer with me. For the next week, me and my colleague shared her computer, 1 hour each at a time. As I had no access to any of my files, client data, etc., all I could do was the barest minimum of work, sending a few emails from my colleague's account. After a week, I got my new client laptop and things went back to normal, but the week of sharing meant my employer had lost around 40 hours of productivity from 2 employees. The shared pain of the experience with my colleague brought us closer together, and when my employer lost their contract with my client a few years later, she helped me get a new job with my employer's competitor. Thank you for watching the video, and if you loved it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.